Looks like you're in high demand, princess.
We're doing everything we can.
How can I trust you? You're so secretive and we don't even know who you are.
Listen, I don't care what the original deal was. So either you raise the payment or I walk.
Complicated? What does that even mean? Is she in danger? You have to tell me what's going on.
What's the plan, Inspector?
Please, bring her back.
So, is he friend or foe?
As Alex's car tore down the road with a trail of dust behind it, Lucas deftly maneuvered his vehicle, maintaining a close pursuit. The sound of police sirens grew fainter as they sped further away. When they reached a fork in the road, Lucas made a split-second decision, veering sharply in the opposite direction from Alex. In the passenger seat, Iris was barely holding it together. Her fear was palpable, her hands shaking uncontrollably.
Where are you taking me? What about Julia? Is she okay? You need to tell me.
She demanded, her voice quivering. Lucas's expression remained inscrutable as he focused on the road.
I'm taking you to a safe place. Right now, your safety is the priority. Julia's situation is complicated.
Complicated? What does that even mean? Is she in danger? You have to tell me what's going on.
Lucas glanced at her, his eyes showing a flicker of empathy.
I'm doing everything I can to ensure her safety, and I will do whatever is necessary to help her.
The car sped through winding streets and eventually reached a fortified house on the outskirts of town. It was a secure, inconspicuous place, surrounded by high fences and guarded by a few discreet security measures. As Lucas pulled up to the house, Iris's fear only intensified.
Where are we? Why does this place look so secure?
Lucas parked the car and turned to Iris with a solemn expression.
This is a safe house. It's a temporary haven until we can get a clearer picture of where Julia is and what's happening.
He led her inside, where a few security personnel were already on alert. Iris's eyes darted around, her anxiety reaching new heights.
How can you be so calm? What if something happens to Julia? What are you going to do?
Lucas's demeanor remained calm and focused.
I'm not going to let anything happen to her. Trust me, I have resources and connections. I'll use everything at my disposal to bring her back safely.
How can I trust you? You're so secretive and we don't even know who you are.
Lucas's gaze softened just a fraction.
Sometimes, the less you know, the safer you are. I've been in situations like this before. I know what needs to be done, and I promise you, Julia will get the help she needs. Just stay here and stay safe. We'll find her.
Iris's shoulders slumped in defeat as she realized there was little she could do but wait. She looked around the safe house, trying to find some solace in the fact that she was out of immediate danger, even as her heart ached for her best friend. Lucas, after ensuring Iris's security and briefing the team on the situation, stepped outside to make a few calls. His actions were calculated, his movements precise. Once he had a location, he quickly got to his car and drove off, determined not to lose Alex. As he closed in, he noticed Alex's vehicle weaving dangerously through traffic, clearly intent on losing him. Lucas's eyes narrowed in focus. Suddenly, Alex swung his car towards an alleyway and pulled out a gun, aiming through the rear window. The sharp crack of gunfire pierced the air as bullets whizzed past Lucas's car. Lucas expertly swerved, narrowly avoiding the shots, his reflexes honed to a razor's edge. The chase continued with high tension. Lucas was just about to gain ground when Alex made a sudden, sharp turn onto an obscure route. Lucas, maintaining his speed, tried to follow but lost sight of Alex as they disappeared into a maze of narrow streets. Frustrated but undeterred, Lucas pulled over and then took a deep breath, trying to calm the adrenaline coursing through him. He needed a new strategy. Turning the car around, Lucas headed back to the safe house. His mind raced with plans and contingencies. When he arrived, he was greeted by the team, who were waiting anxiously for his report. They could sense the gravity of the situation from his demeanor.
Alex knows that I'm a traitor and that I'm going after him. He's on to us. We need to regroup and come up with a new plan.
Lucas said tersely as he walked into the house. Iris, who had been pacing nervously, looked up with a mix of hope and fear.
Did you find Julia?
Lucas shook his head. He quickly set up a makeshift command center, pulling up maps and tracking systems. The team sprang into action, coordinating with local authorities and using all available resources to locate Alex and, ultimately, Julia. The tension in the safe house was palpable. Iris couldn't shake her anxiety about her friend. Every noise outside, every passing minute, seemed to stretch time and heighten her unease. Lucas, aware of Iris's distress, tried to offer some reassurance.
We're doing everything we can. Alex is a professional, but we have resources and experience on our side. We'll find them.
Back on the road, Alex drove to a secluded area far from the bustling city of Cape Town and pulled the car to a stop. He glanced around, ensuring that the place was as desolate as he had planned. The terrain was rugged, the kind of place where no one would stumble upon them by accident. Satisfied with the location, he roughly pulled Julia out of the car, ignoring her protests as he dragged her into an old, abandoned building nearby. The air inside was thick with dust, and the only light came from the faint glow of the setting sun seeping through broken windows. Alex pushed Julia onto a chair and quickly tied her hands to the armrests, securing her in place. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and pulled out his phone. Julia, still dazed from the sudden movements, tried to regain her composure. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took in her surroundings, trying to figure out a way out of this mess. She knew she had to stay calm, but the fear was overwhelming. Alex, meanwhile, dialed a number on his phone and waited impatiently as it rang. When the call connected, his voice dropped to a low, menacing tone.
It's me. I've got the package, but I'm going to need a little more compensation for my troubles.
There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Alex's expression darkened.
Listen, I don't care what the original deal was. This job got a lot more complicated. I had to shake off a tail, and now I've got heat on me. So, either you raise the payment or I walk.
Another pause, then a begrudging agreement from the voice on the phone. Alex smirked, his confidence returning.
Good. I'll deliver her by midnight. You better have my money ready.
He ended the call and turned to Julia, who was watching him with a mix of fear and defiance.
Looks like you're in high demand, princess. Too bad for you. I'm not one to back out of a deal.
He sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Julia's mind raced. Midnight. She had until midnight to figure out a way to escape, or whatever fate Alex had in store for her would become a grim reality. She tugged at the ropes binding her wrists, wincing as they dug into her skin. Alex noticed her struggling and let out a dark chuckle.
You can squirm all you want, but those knots aren't going anywhere. Just sit tight and enjoy the ride.
He walked over to a corner of the room and sat down, keeping a watchful eye on her as he pulled out a cigarette. The flick of the lighter illuminated his face for a moment before he leaned back, exhaling a cloud of smoke with a look of satisfaction. Julia tried to ignore the growing sense of dread, forcing herself to think clearly. She had to find a way out of this. Every second counted, and she knew that Lucas and Iris were out there somewhere, hopefully closing in on her location. But could they find her in time? As the minutes ticked by, Alex occasionally checked his watch, his impatience growing. Outside, the sky continued to darken, casting long shadows across the deserted landscape. The tension was palpable, each tick of the clock bringing Julia closer to an uncertain fate. She knew she needed a miracle to turn the tide in her favor. The plane touched down in Cape Town, and the palpable tension hung in the air as Chief Crown, Anna, Iris's parents, and Daniel made their way through the airport. Their faces were drawn with worry, but there was a determination in their steps. Throughout the flight, prayers had been whispered under breath, and hope was all they clung to in this moment of desperation.
Lord, please protect our daughters.
Anna whispered as they hurried to the car waiting for them outside. Iris's mother silently echoed the same prayer as they drove directly to the police headquarters, where Daniel's old colleague, Inspector Jones, greeted them. His face was lined with concern, but there was a flicker of reassurance in his eyes.
Thank God you've arrived. We've made some progress on the case, but time is critical.
Jones said, shaking Daniel's hand. In a nearby room, a large map of the city was pinned to the wall, dotted with markers and lines tracing potential routes and locations. As the group settled in, Jones began explaining the situation.
Alex is a known criminal.
Jones began, his voice serious.
He's been involved in several high-profile kidnappings and trafficking operations. He's dangerous and has a network that makes him difficult to track. So we need to move quickly.
Chief Crown, his usual stoic demeanor cracking, clenched his fists.
What's the plan, Inspector? We have a team out in the field now, combing through possible locations. But first, we need to take you to the safe house. There's someone there you need to see.
The ride to the safe house was tense, punctuated by silent prayers and whispered reassurances. When they arrived, Iris rushed out to greet her parents, tears streaming down her face. The embrace was tight and filled with relief, but the worry for Julia was still thick in the air. As they all settled inside, Iris began recounting what had happened since they were taken, her voice shaking slightly as she relived the terror of the past few days. She mentioned Lucas and how he had taken a different route at the fork in the road, bringing her to safety.
Lucas? He seemed like he was on our side, but I don't really know who he is. He gave us a phone to call for help and then drove me here.
The parents exchanged confused glances before Chief Crown asked,
Who is this Lucas?
I know someone who fits that description, but he goes by another name. Well, let's just say he's not what he appears to be.
Iris's father looked puzzled.
So, is he friend or foe?
If it's him, then he's one of the good guys.
Daniel shrugged, but there was a hint of respect in his eyes. In a nearby room, Lucas was sitting with Jones and a few other officers, poring over maps and strategizing the next move. The tension in the room was thick as they discussed potential hideouts and exit routes Alex might take. Soon, Lucas stepped out of the meeting room for a brief moment, catching the eye of Chief Crown. There was a silent exchange, a nod of understanding. Lucas might not have been a man of many words, but his resolve was clear. In the stillness that followed, Chief Crown joined his wife in prayer. Lucas stood outside the safe house, the cool evening breeze brushing against his face as he took a moment to clear his thoughts. The weight of the situation bore heavily on him, and he knew that time was running out. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, his hand resting on the cold steel of the car parked beside him.
Lord, give me the strength and wisdom to save her. Guide my steps.
He whispered under his breath. After a moment of quiet contemplation, Lucas turned back towards the safe house, his resolve hardened. He stepped inside, the low murmur of prayers and the quiet conversations of worried parents filling the room. Chief Crown looked up expectantly as Lucas entered.
We're still combing the area, but we haven't pinpointed their exact location yet.
Lucas said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Chief Crown, his face drawn with anxiety, pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number.
Mike, we need that location. Where is Julia?
He said as soon as the call connected. On the other end, Mike's voice crackled with static, but there was a note of determination in it.
I've been tracking the last known coordinates from the phone Julia used. It's an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. It looks like the signal hasn't moved for a while, which means they're probably holed up there.
Good work.
Chief Crown replied, his voice a mix of relief and tension. He relayed the information to the group, and all eyes turned to Lucas, waiting for the plan. Lucas pulled out a map of Cape Town, spreading it on the table as everyone gathered around. His finger traced a route from the safe house to the abandoned building.
Here's what we're going to do. Daniel, you, me, and Inspector Jones will take point. We'll approach the building from the south, where there's less chance of being seen. Our goal is to get in and out as quietly as possible.
Daniel nodded.
And if things go sideways,
Lucas glanced at him, his eyes firm.
We adapt. The element of surprise is on our side. If Alex senses anything he could move or worse, harm Julia, we need to be quick and precise.
Iris's father, ever the cautious one, raised a hand.
What about backup?
We'll have a few men stationed around the perimeter, just in case. But the fewer people inside, the better. We don't want to spook them.
We'll stay here and keep praying.
Lucas offered a small nod, appreciative of the sentiment, even as his mind remained focused on the task ahead.
We move out in 10 minutes. Everyone get ready.
The room buzzed with a flurry of activity as Daniel and Inspector Jones gathered their gear, and Lucas double-checked the coordinates and details with Mike over the phone. As Lucas, Daniel, and the team loaded up into their vehicles, Iris approached Lucas, her face pale but determined.
Please, bring her back. She's like a sister to me.
Lucas looked her in the eyes.
By God's grace, I will.
The drive to the abandoned building was tense, the men silent as they mentally prepared for what lay ahead. Lucas led the convoy, his eyes scanning the darkening streets, every turn bringing them closer to their target. His mind was sharp, replaying the plan over and over, while silently he kept a prayer on his lips. When they arrived, they parked the vehicles a distance away, proceeding on foot towards the building. The structure was ominous, standing like a shadow against the night sky, its windows broken and walls covered in graffiti. Lucas motioned for the team to split up, Daniel and Jones flanking the sides while Lucas moved towards the main entrance. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the occasional creak of the old building. Lucas moved silently, his gun drawn, every sense heightened. As they closed in on the location Mike had pinpointed, Lucas signaled for the team to halt. He listened, his ear attuned to any movement. There was a faint noise coming from the far end of the building, a voice, followed by a muffled cry. Lucas motioned for Daniel to cover the rear while he and Jones crept forward. The tension was electric, every step measured and cautious. Lucas could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he maintained his focus, knowing that Julia's life depended on it. They reached a door slightly ajar, and Lucas peeked inside. There, tied to a chair, was Julia, her eyes wide with fear but filled with a spark of hope as she saw him. Alex was pacing nearby, his back turned, unaware of the danger creeping up on him. Lucas locked eyes with Jones and nodded. Just as Lucas and Jones made their move, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from behind. In an instant, a group of armed men emerged from the shadows, their guns trained on Lucas, Jones, and Daniel. The ambush was swift and well-coordinated, leaving no room for escape. Lucas's heart sank as the realization hit him, they'd been outmaneuvered. Alex turned at the sound of the commotion, a smug grin spreading across his face as he saw Lucas and the others with their hands raised, surrounded by his men. He walked over, his demeanor dripping with arrogance.
Did you really think you could pull off a rescue mission under my nose? You might have tracked us down, but I've been a step ahead of you from the start.
He sneered and grabbed Julia roughly by the arm, pulling her to her feet. She winced but kept her eyes locked on Lucas, who remained calm despite the dire situation. Alex shoved her towards the door, his men clearing a path as he made his way to the car parked outside.
Looks like you've lost this one.
Alex taunted, his voice carrying an air of finality as he forced Julia into the passenger seat. He turned to his men, giving them a nod before slipping into the driver's seat and starting the engine. The car roared to life, and Alex sped off, leaving Lucas, Daniel, and Jones at the mercy of the armed men. The situation seemed hopeless, the rescue mission turning into a nightmare. Lucas, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him, closed his eyes briefly.
Lord, I need your help. I can't do this alone.
As if in response to his silent prayer, the distant sound of helicopters began to fill the air. The rumbling grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the night. The armed men exchanged uncertain glances, their grip on their weapons loosening slightly. Suddenly, the area was flooded with bright searchlights from the helicopters hovering overhead. The unmistakable presence of the military was a game changer. The armed men hesitated, realizing that they were outmatched. One by one, they began to lower their weapons, dropping them to the ground in surrender. The relief was palpable as Lucas and the others quickly disarmed the men, securing the situation. The military operatives descended swiftly, taking control and rounding up the remaining criminals. Lucas wasted no time. He sprinted towards the nearest car, his mind focused on one thing: catching up to Alex and rescuing Julia.
Go. We'll handle things here.
Jones shouted, as he and Daniel helped secure the area. Lucas jumped into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life as he peeled out of the building's driveway, following the direction Alex had taken. The adrenaline surged through his veins, his senses heightened as he navigated the narrow streets, his eyes scanning for any sign of Alex's car.
I'm coming for you, Julia.
He muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on the wheel. Lucas sped through the of Cape Town, the streetlights blurring past him as he focused intently on the number his phone displayed. He dialed Mike's number with shaky hands, knowing that every second counted.
Mike, it's Lucas. I need the live feed on Julia's location. Now.
Got it. I'm sending you the coordinates and the live feed. Be careful out there.
Within moments, Lucas's phone pinged with the updated information. A map on the screen showed Julia's location, and Lucas's heart sank as he realized how close he was to catching up with Alex. The coordinates led him to a narrow cliffside road, twisting precariously above the ocean. Lucas's pulse raced as he maneuvered his car around the tight curves. The live feed from Mike's system showed Alex's car just ahead, the vehicle moving erratically. The tension in Lucas's chest tightened as he saw Alex glancing back in frustration. Alex's face twisted into a scowl as he noticed Lucas closing in. Desperate to shake Lucas off, Alex swerved violently, trying to force Lucas off the road. Bullets rang out. The sound of gunfire punctuating the night as Alex fired at Lucas's car. The shots ricocheted off the pavement, and Lucas swerved to avoid them, his heart pounding as he fought to stay on course. Suddenly, Alex's car sped dangerously close to the edge of the cliff. The night air was filled with the roaring of engines and the screeching of tires. Alex, caught in his fury, didn't realize the impending danger. As he took another sharp turn, his car went off the edge of the cliff, and the scene unfolded in slow motion. Julia, bound and terrified, had been struggling to free herself. Seeing the perilous situation, she managed to loosen her bindings and, with a burst of desperation, flung open the car door. The wind whipped through the vehicle as she prepared to jump, but the car was already careening off the edge. With a final, heartbreaking scream, Julia leaped out of the vehicle. The dark expanse of the sea loomed below her as she fell through the air. The world around her seemed to blur, her only sensation being the rush of wind and the cold panic gripping her heart. A lone tear escaped her eye as she shut her eyes tightly, whispering a final, desperate prayer.
Jesus, I'm sorry for the life I've lived,
she murmured, her voice barely audible over the wind. As she plummeted towards the sea, a faint, muffled scream reached her ears. It was Lucas, his voice desperate as he called her name, but it was too late. The sound of the ocean grew louder as she fell, and then, with a shattering splash, she plunged into the dark, frigid water. The impact was jarring, and Julia's world was swallowed by the sea. She sank slowly, the cold water closing around her. Her breath was taken away by the shock, and she could feel herself drifting downward, her movements growing sluggish. Her thoughts were a blur as she tried to stay conscious, but the water pulled her deeper. As she sank, her mind flickered with memories of her family, her life, and her final prayer. The weight of the water pressed down on her, and her vision darkened as she descended into the depths. Julia found herself in an unending black void, the darkness pressing in from all sides. She sat on the cold ground, her breaths ragged and her heart pounding. She called out for her father, Daddy, her best friend, Mommy, but her voice echoed only to be swallowed by the emptiness. There was no response, only the oppressive silence that seemed to close in on her. Desperation began to take hold as she stood up and started walking, hoping that a path would appear or that she would find an escape from the overwhelming darkness. Her footsteps felt heavy, each step leading her deeper into the abyss. The darkness around her seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive with each passing moment. She stumbled and fell, her exhaustion catching up with her. Kneeling on the ground, Julia began to cry. Her tears mingled with her desperate pleas.
Please, someone help me. I'm lost. I need help.
Her voice broke as she sobbed, feeling utterly alone and abandoned. Just as her cries seemed to fade into the darkness, a soft, warm light began to appear. It started as a faint glimmer in the distance, gradually growing brighter and more encompassing. Julia looked up, her eyes widening as a hand, glowing with a divine radiance, reached out to her from the light. It was a hand that promised hope and salvation. Trembling but filled with a spark of hope, Julia reached out and took the hand. As she stood, the darkness seemed to recede, the light enveloping her in its warm embrace. When she looked up, she saw Jesus standing before her, his face radiant with a compassionate smile. Julia's heart swelled with a mix of relief and awe. Without hesitation, she embraced him, her tears flowing freely as she clung to the Savior who had come to her in her darkest moment. Jesus gently patted her on the back, his presence soothing her troubled soul.
Your journey isn't over, Julia. There are people waiting for you, people who love you and need you.
Jesus said softly, his voice filled with warmth. Julia looked up at him, her heart aching with questions and doubt.
But how could you forgive me? I've made so many mistakes.
I forgave your sins over 2,000 years ago. My grace has always been there for you. The old is gone and the new has come. You are a new creation in me.
As he spoke, a brilliant tiara appeared in his hand, and he placed it gently on her head. The moment the tiara touched her, the darkness around her dissolved, transforming into a breathtaking field of blooming flowers, vibrant with life and beauty. The once oppressive blackness was now replaced with colors and light, a testament to the new beginning Jesus had promised. Julia looked around in wonder, the beauty of the scene filling her with a profound sense of peace and joy. She realized that the darkness she had known was no longer her reality. The field was alive with the promise of renewal and hope. Jesus smiled at her with infinite kindness.
Remember, Julia, I love you more than you can ever comprehend. I am with you always, and I will never forsake you.
The beeping of a monitor grew louder, gradually pulling Julia from the depths of her unconscious state. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she blinked in confusion as she took in her surroundings, a bright, sterile hospital room. The soft hum of medical equipment and the steady rhythm of the heart monitor were the only sounds breaking the silence. She turned her head slightly and noticed Lucas asleep in a chair beside her bed. His head was tipped back, his breathing slow and steady. A gentle smile touched her lips as she observed him, feeling a wave of gratitude and relief. Julia's throat felt dry, and she reached for the water jug on the nightstand, her hand trembling slightly. Before she could grab it, Lucas stirred, his eyes blinking open at the sound of movement. When he saw Julia awake, his face lit up with a mixture of joy and relief.
Oh, thank God. You're awake.
The intensity of his reaction caught Julia off guard, and she managed a weak smile.
How long have I been asleep?
Lucas quickly poured a cup of water and handed it to her.
3 days. It's nothing short of a miracle that both you and the baby survived.
Julia took a sip, her eyes welling up with tears.
Thank you, Jesus.
She whispered, her voice breaking as she looked up at him with gratitude. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of relief and the weight of everything that had happened. Lucas gently patted her hand, offering comfort.
I sent everyone else to rest for now. They're exhausted and need to recharge. They'll be back shortly.
Julia nodded, her gaze shifting to Lucas with a hint of concern.
What about the baby? Did you?
Lucas took a deep breath, the gravity of the situation evident in his eyes.
Before all this happened, you mentioned that I was the father of your baby. I need to know, has there been anyone else since then?
Julia's eyes widened at his directness, but she saw the earnestness in his face.
Yes, you're the only one.
Lucas nodded slowly, his face reflecting the weight of the revelation. He had been preparing himself for a range of possibilities, but her confirmation made the situation more real. Julia noticed the way he seemed to absorb the news with a mix of relief and contemplation. Lucas took a deep breath.
Actually, my name isn't Lucas. It's Kai.
Julia's eyes widened in shock.
Kai? From elementary and high school?
Kai nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips.
Yes, it's me. I've been using a different name for reasons I can't go into right now, but it's really me.
Wow, I can't believe it's you. All this time, I had no idea.
As the afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the hospital window, Julia and Kai found themselves slipping into an easy banter, their shared past and recent experiences creating a strange but comforting bond. It was as if the weight of their situation had temporarily lifted, allowing them to enjoy a moment of normalcy in the midst of chaos.
So what happened after we graduated? I don't remember seeing you at any reunions or around town.
Kai leaned back in his chair, his expression turning thoughtful as he recalled his past.
After high school, my family had a stroke of luck. My dad's business took off, and we suddenly had more money than we knew what to do with. We moved abroad, living the high life for a while, but it didn't last. Things went wrong, really wrong, and we ended up losing almost everything. We had to move back to Nigeria, and we didn't have much left. My uncle, who somehow became wealthy while we were gone, took us in and supported us. He lived nearby, and one day my mom asked me to deliver something to him. I'll never forget that day. I was wandering around his house when I stumbled upon a hidden room. Inside, there was spy tech, gadgets stuffed straight out of a spy movie. My uncle found me, and instead of being mad, he offered to teach me. I agreed, not really knowing what I was getting into. Slowly, I started doing jobs for the government. It was all cloak and dagger stuff, dangerous but thrilling. A few years later, my younger brother joined me in the field. We were a team. But then we had a mission go horribly wrong. Everyone else, they didn't make it. I was the only one who survived. It was a nightmare, and I didn't know how to deal with the pain. So I did what I thought would help. I went to Club Infinity, trying to drown it all out.
Julia's heart tightened as she remembered that night at the club. She hadn't known the man who approached her was carrying so much pain.
That's when you saw me.
Yeah, we were both drunk. By the time I woke up in your penthouse, I saw a picture of you as a kid hanging on the wall. That's when it hit me. I knew you. I remembered you from school. But I panicked and left before I could explain anything. Then my life spiraled out of control. The grief, the guilt, it all became too much. I was losing myself. That's when one of my colleagues found me and practically dragged me to a church event. I didn't want to go, but something inside me said I should. At the event, I heard about how much I was loved, that Jesus had taken all my sorrows on himself when he died, and that he was always there, even in my darkest moments. I gave my life to Christ that night. I handed him all my pain, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. That's how I'm here now. I got a mission soon after to go undercover as one of Alex's men to destroy his operation from the inside. But then, out of nowhere, you and your friend showed up at the tattoo parlor. I was shocked and scared for you both. I wanted to scream, to tell you to leave, but one of Alex's guys was watching me. I had no choice but to bring you along, all the while praying for a way to keep you safe.
Julia reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently.
Thank you.
No, thank God.
As Julia and Kai sat in the hospital room, a comfortable silence settling between them, the door slowly creaked open. Her parents, Chief Crown and Anna, entered, carrying a tray of food. The tension from the past few days was still evident in their expressions, but relief softened their features as they saw their daughter awake and smiling.
Look who's finally up.
Chief Crown said, trying to sound cheerful despite the concern still lingering in his voice. Julia smiled, her heart warming at the sight of her parents. Anna hurried over to her, setting the tray down and fussing over her as only a mother could.
You need to eat and regain your strength, my dear.
As they settled in, the door opened again, and Iris walked in with her parents. The room quickly filled with greetings, hugs, and laughter, a stark contrast to the fear and worry that had consumed them just days before. Julia's eyes met Kai's, and she realized the time had come to introduce him to her family. Her heart raced as she took a deep breath.
Mommy, Daddy, everyone. I want you to meet Kai.
She paused, glancing at Kai before continuing.
He's the father of my child.
The room fell into a stunned silence. Chief Crown's face shifted from surprise to anger in a matter of seconds. He took a step towards Kai, his hands balling into fists.
You? You're the one responsible for this?
Kai stood up slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace.
Sir, I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be.
Before things could escalate, the television in the corner of the room suddenly caught everyone's attention. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen, and the room grew silent as the reporter began speaking.
This just in. The notorious criminal Alex, who has been involved in numerous illegal activities across several countries, has reportedly passed after driving his car off a cliff. Authorities confirm that all of his known accomplices have been apprehended, and any victims who were affected by his organization have been rescued.
The room remained quiet as the news sank in. Chief Crown, still standing close to Kai, slowly lowered his hands, the anger in his eyes giving way to confusion and concern.
Is it true? Is it really over?
Kai nodded, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity.
Yes, sir. It's over. Alex can't hurt anyone anymore.
So your name is Kai? Not Lucas?
Yes, sir. And I know we have a lot to talk about. But right now, I'm just thankful that Julia and the baby are safe.
Chief Crown studied Kai for a moment, the sternness returning to his gaze.
We'll have that talk soon. But for now, I suppose. Thank you.
Kai nodded, accepting the partial truce.
So, let me get this straight. You met Kai, your husband-to-be, in the middle of this wild life or death adventure, and now you're telling me this whole story like it's some kind of rom-com?
Julia laughed, a soft, melodic sound that filled the room.
Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit crazy. But yes, that's exactly how it happened.
Ava shook her head in disbelief, finally resuming her task of securing the last pin in Julia's hair.
And now here you are, about to marry the guy who saved your life and the father of your child, no less. This is straight out of a movie, Julia.
Julia glanced at the mirror, her eyes softening as she took in her reflection. The woman staring back at her was so different from the one who had gone through all those harrowing experiences. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the new life ahead of her.
God works in mysterious ways. I couldn't see it at the time, but every step of that journey was leading me to a better and closer relationship with Jesus.
Julia said quietly, more to herself than to Ava. Ava smiled, her disbelief turning into admiration as she looked at her cousin. Just then, the door to the room opened, and Anna stepped in, holding a giggling baby Cole in her arms.
Julia, they're waiting for you outside. And this little one was getting impatient to see his mama.
Julia's face lit up as she reached for her son, who immediately wrapped his tiny arms around her neck.
Hey there, my little man. Are you ready to see Mommy and Daddy get married?
Cole gurgled in response, and Julia laughed, the sound filled with pure joy. Before she could fully savor the moment, the door cracked open again, and Iris's head popped in.
Ooh, you look stunning. But seriously, Julia, you need to hurry up. I take my maid of honor duties very seriously, and we can't keep everyone waiting.
She exclaimed, her eyes twinkling with excitement. Julia chuckled, shaking her head at her friend's enthusiasm.
All right, I'm coming.
As Iris disappeared back into the hallway, Julia stood up, carefully balancing Cole in her arms. Anna stepped forward, gently taking Cole from Julia's arms so she could slip into her wedding attire.
You look beautiful, Julia. God has truly blessed you.
Her mother said softly, her eyes misty with emotion. Julia turned to face her mother, her heart full.
He has, Mommy. More than I ever could have imagined.
With her dress perfectly in place and her hairstyle just right, Julia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was ready. Ready to start this new chapter with Kai, ready to embrace the future with their son, and ready to walk in the path that God had set before her. As she took a deep breath and prepared to step out of the room, she glanced at the mirror one last time. A smile spread across her face.
I'm ready.
She whispered to herself, and with that, she walked out of the room, towards her new life.